Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. We're going to do some things different. You guys are actually going to be able to interact with me tonight if this works. I found a few tricks. I can actually post the chat. So, um, not that I want to interfere with anybody, but here's the cool thing. I'll be able to go back, and when you guys make a comment that I really want to share with the audience who might watch later on, or even those watching via Facebook, I'm going to have the potential of doing that. So I'm hoping this will make it more interactive. Um, there is I can't even pronounce his name, but I'm always getting tips from other guys. And I was looking at OBS, which was an older platform that I used, and he explained the code for this. And so I coded it. So don't feel inhibited, but it's a real chance for you guys to be a part of all that's going on here. And I think that's really worthwhile. In the background of my house, my wife's actually away visiting our first grandchild. And so they're doing a screen thing. And I'm really hoping it won't interfere with our internet too much tonight. But it is good to have everybody here. We're going to be dealing with another Singer objection. Now, after this particular video, Rabbi Singer's objections go about 30 minutes, and I'm not going to try to take clips from those. But we will deal with his hate fest probably in the future, Lord willing, as God leads with the Apostle Paul. Tonight we're going to deal with some other objections. For those who remind people, yeah, if you're new, hit the subscribe button. Guys, we are 3 subscribers away from me hitting the 300 mark as far as subscribers. As far as actually uploaded videos, we're way ahead of that. And as far as views, we're over 8K. I know it's a small station, but the point is we're plugging away. And so definitely, hit those likes. It gets us on the board. And someday when I get to 1,000, I'll be able to actually email you guys directly and send messages to you. Wouldn't that be neat? And kind of let you know things. So that's a day that I'm looking forward to. In the meantime, I'm sure that Rabbi Singer and others will provide fantastic material for us. So on that note, I'm going to go, oh, hey, let me do this real quick here. Shout out to Jordan, who is at the Peru Grace Brethren Church. And him and his family are very dear to us. He just finished doing some broadcasting of himself. And so he was able to join us tonight. So a shout out to Jordan. And you could probably see that little thing there, I hope, that it actually appeared there. I'm not quite sure. There we go. Spin that up there a little bit more. There we go. And that should show. Excellent. All right. Thank you, Radical Love, for welcoming Jordan. You guys are absolutely great. We're going to do some Tovia Singer stuff, so we're going to get to Tovia and deal with his stuff and get going. I see some faces. There are always folks that are part of the community. Sometimes they can't be there. Sometimes they can be there for a particular episode, and I'm always thrilled to see them. So that is absolutely wonderful. Let's get to the PowerPoint here and see how this is going to run from us. Now, for us, remember that there's always a delay. I can't help it. It's just there. So I am seeing things just a few minutes ahead of you. It's one of the unfortunate parts of things, but there we go. I knew you would catch up. There we go. We're going to be looking at what Tovia Singer's view of Jesus and Paul is in light of Deuteronomy 13. Deuteronomy 13 dealing with apostates in the Israelite community. And so we're going to deal with this. Long ago, there was provisions made if a Israelite decided to tell other Israelites to go and seek other gods. And so Tovia Singer's got some ideas about this. In order to get to Tovia, you're going to see the Distractors Corner. I'm going to let you hear the clip of Tovia. Now, if you're not used to Tovia, you're only going to get a small dose because it's about all you can take. Um, but you're going to get used to his style. So let me go over to his clip. I do this so that people who are making certain objections can be heard. I'm not putting words in their mouth. But now that Tovia is going 30 and 40 minutes, I'm not going to do 30 and 40 minutes. And taking clips out is really difficult with Tovia because he really switches and goes back over things dozens of times. So let me get you to the Detractors Corner, which is our special corner when we deal with individuals. And once I get to the Detractors Corner here, I should be able to hit this, and you will be able to hear Tovia and see Tovia for yourself.
Daniel S. asked a question. Deuteronomy chapter 13,
Sure.
verse 1 through 4, and 1 through 5. Is that possibly a warning about ideological theologies like Christianity and others as well?
I don't have a clue what Jesus actually said. As it turns out, he didn't write anything, or if he did, it did not. No one copied it over, so we don't have anything that Jesus wrote. So we don't have a clue what Jesus actually said. But Deuteronomy 13, just to provide for those who are not familiar with this chapter, deals with the enticer among your people. A Jew among your people, the son of your mother, means among your brethren, who will entice you to call you to follow other gods that you did not know, to not keep the commandments. The law is over. You don't have to keep the commandments anymore. This person is not coming in the name of God, even if he will perform miracles and wonders and signs. That's how Deuteronomy 13 begins. It says if a prophet, even though they're false prophets, the term false prophet is really not used in the Torah. It just calls him a prophet. A dreamer of dreams says, shows you a sign or a wonder, and the sign and the wonder, the miracle happens. The person's able to produce miracles, or is able to predict the future accurately. And then the person says, follow other gods their father didn't know, or don't keep the commandments. Or the Torah says, do not listen to that prophet or dreamer of dreams. I did not send him, saith the Lord. The question, of course, comes to mind is, well, why would God allow false prophets and false religions to produce spiritual experiences? Why would people in every religion encounter a numinous experience? Why? Why would, well, God tells us there, and that is, I am only testing you to see if you love me. And then that's it, just a test. So if let's say I met a Zoroastrian who was able to make dead people come alive, I still wouldn't convert. If a Hindu, in the name of the monkey god, started talking in tongues, I would not become a Hindu. It wouldn't make a difference. It has to, the message of the Torah must be upheld by every prophet. No prophet added an extra commandment or took away a commandment. And any person who says that the commandments were temporary, or that person is lying. And then the Torah does.
Okay, we've heard from Tovia. Let me talk to you about how deadly this stuff is. This is one of the reasons you cannot just go to a Jewish person and say, look, Jesus rose from the dead. See, if you were to pull that on Tovia, he would go ahead and he would simply say, yeah, but see, if someone rose from the dead in the name of the monkey god, it doesn't matter. It's absolutely irrelevant. It's unimportant. Jesus' resurrection means nothing if he tells us to do certain things that Deuteronomy 13 says we shouldn't do. And so that's exactly what his sort of claim would be. And so this is in contrast. If you're talking to William Lane Craig, he went on the Ben Shapiro show and he just threw the resurrection at Ben Shapiro, an Orthodox Jew, and said, see, Jesus rose from the dead. Now, it doesn't mean that Jesus' resurrection has no meaning. What it does mean is this is his way around stuff like this. And so we have to be aware of this sort of reaction, which is what you're going to end up getting pretty much with Tovia Singer. And this is the way he's going to work around it. This is the way he's going to deal with it. The resurrection does demonstrate something as far as Jesus, but you have to be aware that there's already a polemic in place that is already, that Singer's already like ready to jump on to deal with. And so it's important that you understand this polemic. Now, he makes a real strange claim, and I really, really need to deal with this claim because this claim is really hysterically funny to me. This claim is that we can't know what Jesus said. I mean, he didn't actually write anything down. And we don't know that we have anything that he did write down. And so we can't, I don't know what Jesus said. You can't know what Jesus said. Nobody can know what Jesus said. That's a first statement that he sort of made. Now he's going to go after Paul real hard. Jesus, he kind of gets kind of ambivalent about. He gets nasty with Jesus in certain videos, and then in other videos, he's sort of like, sort of couldn't deal with that. Now, a great little comment came up, and I'll flash that a little later. See, you guys are, your comments are going to be there. Where they're really, I'll point out some really great things that you're bringing up. But this is his comment. Essentially, we don't know what the New Testament contains writing on Jesus's teaching. Because which Jesus didn't directly write, we just can't know. Now you have to understand how ridiculous this sort of position is. And if you joined us, please hang out because this is worth the price of admission here. Okay. You need to understand that there's less of a basis. We're going to get to it, but if I use his reasoning, and this is what you have to do sometimes, okay? Use the other person's reasoning against them. I mean, that's fair. That's an equal standard. If you're going to make a claim, you're liable to the same claim you're making of your opponent. It's real important. It's equal weights and measures. And so, don't go away and don't be afraid to do that, to turn the tables and say, okay, well, if I apply this same standard, where do you end up? So let's look at this standard here. We can't know what Jesus said because Jesus didn't personally write it down. And it wasn't written down by him in this day. And so this is his sort of claim. So let's look at the Jewish writings. Do they attain to the same level of claim here? The massive material in the Babylonian Talmud was not edited all at once. Now, I'm quoting a non-Christian source for this. So if you wonder why I'm doing this, Rabbi Singer, I'm quoting your own Jewish sources here. Okay? And that's real important if you can use someone's own source. So this is taken from Jewish law, history, sources, and principles, the Jewish Publication Society. So I'm not quoting a Christian document. The massive material in the Babylonian Talmud was not edited all at once. A careful analysis of the content reveals that it's a collection of many sources, strata, from different periods, generations, different authors and editors, and different yeshivot. Those are, this is rabbi school, religious training, yeshiva. Academies, 40 each yeshivas taught the Talmud according to its own individual approach and style. In Surah, it was taught one way. In Nahardia, another way. Most scholars believe that the editing of the material in the Babylonian Talmud began at the height of the Amoraic period. Now, I know that's a little complicated here, but hang out with me because you're going to get some Jewish history here. What Menachem Elon is saying is that the Talmud is a compilation over time with parts of it being taught differently, removed from the original contributors, sometimes by generations. Now remember, okay, the claim is you can't know what Jesus said because he didn't write it down. In other words, it wasn't immediately recorded. So, Rabbi Singer said, I can't know what Jesus said, which infers we can't know what Jesus said. All right? But the Talmud is a compilation over hundreds of years, some of the material very far removed from its original writers who did not immediately write it down. But even more so, if we look on an article on the Talmud in Baker's Encyclopedia of the Bible, 2031 and 2032, we see this writing. Now, it may be a little difficult for you to see. Let me read it to you. The traditional Jews believe that a second law was given to Moses in addition to the first or written word, and that second one was given orally and handed down generation to generation in an oral form. The Talmud itself makes this claim for the early origin, and Pirkei Avot 1 states that it is attributed to Moses. Other scholars do not agree on this origin to the oral law and insist it had its beginning and development after Ezra. For example, there is no mention of post-exilic prophets concerning a lapse from the oral law, but its message of the prophets abounds in warnings and abandonment of the written revelation given to Moses, thereby indicating the absence of a body of oral law prior to the Babylonian exile. Okay, what is all this about? Okay, and he goes on to say the succession. There are two views being stated here. One is that Moses received the oral law and it was passed down only orally. So there's this written Torah and there's this second law, and you've heard me talk about this before. Okay, this is part of the very basic fabric of Orthodox Judaism. All right, this is a pillar of Orthodox Judaism. Some say Ezra. All right, but the important thing is this oral law was never written down. Now, Singer's claim is we can't know what Jesus said because he didn't write it down immediately. But you have an oral law that's accepted by Judaism with generations between when it was spoken and when it was written down. In fact, they go on to say across centuries, many memorizing devices were employed to learn and remember the growing mass of opinions and interpretations, but eventually not even the best memory could retain all the materials. Okay? Now, if we follow Singer's method, you can't know what the rabbi said, because it wasn't originally written down. See, if Jesus had to originally write down or have someone write down his sayings immediately when he said them for us to know what Jesus said, then the rabbis would be liable to exactly the same standard. All right? So here's the thing. Rabbi Singer, we can't know. We can't know what Hillel said. We can't know what Shammai said. We can't know what Yohanan ben Zakkai said. We can't know what Judah HaNasi said because that stuff wasn't compiled until later. Okay? The Talmud is a later compiled document of early oral law, which was not written down. So we cannot know what the oral law says because it was not written down by Moses at the time. I'm just applying his standard to the rabbinical writings. I mean, let's use the same standard. This is like a really wild claim to make given the nature of Orthodox Judaism. How could you make such a claim? And yet he has no problem with this claim being made about rabbinical writings, but he somehow doesn't believe we can know what Jesus said. I mean, is that very reasonable? Does that make any sense to create that standard? Here's an example of Babylonian Talmud, Shabbat 31a. Watch this, okay? Once there was a Gentile came before Shammai and said to him, "Convert me on the condition." said to him, "Convert me on the condition that you teach me the whole Torah while standing on one foot." Shammai pushed him aside with a measuring stick he was holding. A fellow came before Hillel, and Hillel converted him, saying, "Whatever is despicable to you, do not do to your fellow man. This is the whole Torah, and the rest is commentary. Go and learn it." Now, here's the bottom line here. Hillel and Shammai existed centuries before the Babylonian Talmud was completed. We can't know that Shammai said this. We can't know that Hillel said this, but Rabbi Singer has no problem with accepting these as legitimate statements of the sages of Israel. He wouldn't question them for a minute, but all of a sudden, when it comes to Jesus, there's this double standard here. So I'm sorry, Rabbi Singer, we can know what Jesus said. We can know what Jesus taught. We can know what Jesus did. In fact, how much time really passed between Hillel and the Talmud? Well, Hillel's 110 BCE, and he dies at 10 CE. That's the same as BC and AD. So let me put it to you in English, okay? How much time really passed before the Talmud and Hillel? Because we're going to compare it to the Gospels. How much time passed between Jesus speaking and the written final draft, the final compilation of the Gospels? How much time passed between Hillel and the written compilation of the Talmud? Well, Hillel dies in 10 CE. That's the same as 10 AD in Jerusalem. Okay, now I got this from a Jewish source. All right, Hillel the Great. So AD 10, the Babylonian Talmud, the Talmud is considered compiled between 6 and 800 AD. So we're talking about 600 years. All right? And there you go. Now, some will go ahead and say it was compiled earlier, 6th century. The third is a little difficult. But even if we go with 300 years, we're still talking about 300 years difference between Hillel's death. After Hillel died, he probably didn't say much else, right? And the compiling of the Babylonian Talmud. And this is a little bit more information about the Babylonian Talmud versus the Jerusalem Talmud. We're talking about a period of 300 years at best, most likely 600 years, between when Hillel said this and when it was written down. 300 years. We're going to get into his exact statements with Deuteronomy, so hang with me. Okay, there's no written record that we know of that's authenticated that exists in any quantity related to what Hillel wrote down in a separate document written by him. In other words, Hillel taught this stuff orally, and 300 years later, at the earliest, it's written down. 600 years if you give the later date. By Rabbi Singer's argument, nobody knows what Rabbi Hillel said. And so that saying of Hillel has to be thrown right out. So Rabbi Singer, you're doing a double standard thing here. Okay? Now, maybe it's nice that he didn't know what Jesus said, because he probably twists that too. All right? But let's just get straight about this, because I don't think he'd get what Jesus was saying. When he talks about Paul and Jesus, he doesn't understand what they're saying or why they say it. But let's talk about the Gospels. Are the Gospels more credible as far as knowing what Jesus said compared to knowing what Hillel said? Just as a comparison, okay? His argument would indicate that we can't know what Hillel said because we can't know what Jesus said. But really, how much time occurred with the Gospels? Now, unlike my brother Steve Atkins, who is a wonderful guy and does an incredible job with Islamic apologetics, we do have some differing opinions. It's not about deep doctrine. We just have a little different timetable. Here's what we do know, no matter what happens. Okay, we know this. First of all, we know this question's complicated. There's a lot of argument about which gospel was written first. And I know that, if John was here, he would weigh in on this. There's a lot of discussion about priority. Was Matthew written first, so there'd be a Matthewian priority or a Lukean priority, Luke being written first? There's a lot of discussion about this. There are a lot of different theories. So it is a little complicated because the relative order in which the Gospels were written is sometimes questioned. We want to be honest with that. But we can be sure of one thing. The three synoptic Gospels, oh, well, a hi to John. The three synoptic Gospels I place before 70 AD. Now, you can question that. I'm not going to, here's why. At least in the case of Matthew, Matthew would have written about the destruction of the temple. I mean, that's so massively important to Jews. I mean, it's crazy important to Jewish people. And so, I know there's a discussion about priority, but let's just say Matthew certainly would have included it. Luke is an expert historian. I really don't see Luke being bad enough at history to ignore such an event, especially although he's not writing to a Jewish audience. Certainly, Rome was aware of the destruction of the temple, and it really represented kind of a coup de grace. Okay. If you give Mark the priority, which many people do, um, then you then have Mark being written before 70 AD. I can be very certain the synoptics were written before 70 AD. Now, I'm later on John than most people do. I think John is probably post destruction of the temple. I place it around the time that some of his other writings occurred. That can be debated. My friend Steve would want to put it earlier. He doesn't like that late date. I do not have a problem. That would be Steve Atkins. I do not have a problem with late dating John. It's not one of the synoptic gospels. It's distinctly different in its flavor. There are events in John that are not recorded in the other three, but would be very important for a post-temple group. Okay. Even if we take the late date, let's create the hypothetical where we take the latest date possible for John. All right, Jesus dies at about 33 AD. Now, I'm not there, okay, but that's roughly the time period. He didn't live to be 80 or 90, okay? They weren't taking a 90-year-old guy and crucifying him when they crucified Christ. We figure that he lived pretty much about age 33, give or take, all right? If you go with a before 70 AD, you're talking about a period that is 40 years or less. If you talk about the Talmud and Hillel, you're talking about a period that's 300 years. If you place John's gospel at 90, we're just taking the most extreme date, okay? Let's give the most latitude to the opposition as possible and say, okay, we'll cede the 90 AD date. Most time between Jesus' death and the finishing of the gospel. Just, to be really, really fair about this thing, okay? If you take 33, you're talking about a period of 60 years, but Singer has no problem with Hillel in the period of time between Hillel's sayings. I mean, he died at 10 AD, folks. He isn't sending material from the grave. He died at 10 AD. The Talmud is compiled between 300 and 600. If we're talking about the Babylonian Talmud, we're talking about a period of 300 years, and he wants to tell me that he can know what Rabbi Hillel said, but he can't know what Jesus said. Now, does that really make sense? I mean, let's think about that. So I just wanted to pick on that because it's a really bizarre sort of argument to take. But it gets him away from having to criticize Jesus in this particular video and allows him to do it in other videos. And it allows him to be nastier with Paul, all right, who is everybody's whipping boy as far as anti-Jewish missionaries. I mean, they just love to beat Paul. They're still stoning Paul to this day. He's just not around for them to physically do it. This is a little small. I put Deuteronomy 13, 1 through 9 up. Now, I could try to bring Logos Bible software, but my CPU's clicking pretty hard tonight. What I'm going to suggest you do is to open to Deuteronomy 13, 1 through 9. Okay, so if you can do that, that would be a real help. I don't know what to tell you if you don't have a Bible. If you're tuning in, you don't have a Bible, this is a great opportunity for you to get a Bible. Okay? Get a Bible. Ask your Christian friend for a Bible. In fact, better yet, when this program's over and your Christian friend gives you a Bible, sit down and read it. Okay? If there arises among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and by the way, he is correct. The term false prophet does not occur. In the Torah. Okay? But, you know, he's pointing to this passage, so let's go with it. A dreamer of dreams and gives you a sign or wonder, or a sign or wonder comes to pass, of which he has spoken to you, saying, let us go after other gods, which you have not known, and serve them. You shall not listen to the words of that prophet or dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. You shall walk after the Lord your God and fear him, and keep his commandments and obey his voice. You shall serve him and hold fast to him. It's actually the word cleave, like the word cleave in marriage. I keep telling people, the Bible uses marital language between Israel and God. It uses marital language between Christ and the church. So take that as well. I think that's really kind of an interesting thing. You cleave to him. But the prophet or dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has spoken in order to turn you away from the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of bondage, to entice you. That's why I said this is about the enticer. To entice you from the way which the Lord your God commanded you to walk, and you shall put away the evil from your midst. And then it just goes on to say, if your brother, the son of your mother, or your son, or your daughter, or the wife of your bosom, or your friend, who is as your own soul, secretly entices you, let us go and serve other gods, which you have not known, neither have your fathers, the gods of the people which are all around you, or near to you, or far from you, from one end of the earth to the other. You shall not consent or listen to him. Your eye shall not pity him, nor shall you spare him or conceal him, but you shall surely kill him. Your hand shall be the first against him to put him to death, and afterwards the hand of the people. Okay, that's the passage he's talking about. All right? Now, Singer added something to the word of God. Beware of this, okay? This is a tactic of the serpent. Did God say you could not eat of the fruit or touch it? Well, God said they couldn't eat of it. He didn't say anything about touching it. The minute she touched it, nothing happened. She had just one more reason to disbelieve. Okay? So be careful. What God says he said, and what he didn't say, he didn't say. Singer is going to infer something as far as the passage that's not in the passage. All right? So let's look at what Singer infers and why he infers it. And why he infers it is as important as what he infers. All right? Now, in a minute or two, you're going to get to see the Hebrew up there. All right? So for the Hebrew fans, hang on there. Okay? And it should come up in a minute. And there's the actual Hebrew for the section that he's inferring from. There it is. Acharet Adonai Elohechem Telehu Ve'oton. It looks like a nun. Tiranu Ve'et Mitzvotiv Tishmoru Vibikolo Tishmaru Ve'otan. Yeah, it has to be Otan because it's from Natan. And here's what it is, okay? There's the passage he's talking about. and he may have it slightly more memorized. I'm actually reading it, but at least the pointings are a little better tonight. He assumes keeping the Lord's commandments precludes God initiating any new covenant or changing his commandments. Yes, John has a question. I'll be able to put the chat up, John, so they can see your question and see my answer. So hang in there, John. This is exactly what I want. This is why I made the chat visible to everybody, so that we could actually carry on a little bit of conversation afterwards. He assumes keeping the commandments precludes God initiating any sort of new covenant or changing the commands, but the text says nothing about those commands remaining the same or no new commands being added. Do you see what's going on here? The only thing that this is against is one thing, but he's inferred another thing. There's nothing at all about the Torah being permanent or immutable. This passage is not about Torah permanence or immutability. Okay? And just to go ahead and point it out, yes, some people are bringing up the new covenant. That's very, very important. Okay? But what I want to do is, you can't drink soup with a fork. This passage isn't about that. This passage is about someone enticing you to follow other gods, which your fathers have not known. All right. Neither Paul nor Jesus ever advocated the worship of any other God but the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This does not qualify for the passage. Okay? Where does Singer get the idea that the Torah can never change? Where does he get this idea that the Torah is somehow immutable eternally? All right? He gets it because he is arguing from the idea that this Torah cannot be superintended or replaced by a post-Maimonidean Judaism that these people didn't know anything about. In other words, he's reading rabbinical Judaism back into the Torah to get this opinion. And not even all of rabbinical Judaism. He's taking a strain of rabbinical Judaism, which became the norm after Moses Maimonides in the Middle Ages, during the medieval period. So he's taken one strain of rabbinical Judaism that took over and closed out the other strains of rabbinical Judaism pretty much. Kind of shut them down. Okay, maybe not completely, but it gained the ascendancy. And he's taking this one strain of rabbinical Judaism that gained the ascendancy, and he's reading it back into the Torah where it's not being said. Nothing in that passage said that. Okay? Let's look at a great resource. I don't know that I can pull it out now. I'm going to try real quick to look for it. Yes, I can find it. Let me put this up there by the camera. Okay, this is worth the price of admission if you can get a hold of it. Okay? This is a good, I don't know how easy it is to get. It was originally done by D.W. Davies, the Society for Biblical Literature. All right? And it's not showing because of my background. Let's see if I can temporarily turn that background off because I want you to see this. So I'm going to go to the Kodachrome here, and I'm going to turn off the virtual background, and it doesn't look like I can do it. Wait a minute. Okay, wait a minute. Yes, I can. There we go. There we go. There's the book, D.W. Davies. It'll come through in a minute. No, it won't. It's fighting me on this. It doesn't like D.W. Davies. There we go. There it is. Okay, I'm putting it up there. This was done by the Society for Biblical Literature. It's quoted in my dissertation pretty extensively. All right. And so there it is. I'm having a little trouble getting in front of the camera there. Okay. That's D.W. Davies. It's a really good resource. He does a survey as far as what Judaism thought about the Torah in the Messianic era. All right. And so that's why that's there. It's a good resource. It's not real thick. He's going to take the debate fully on and go ahead and do that. And so that's why I showed that book. This is page 1. Here's what it says. The early Christians believed that Jesus of Nazareth was the Messiah of Jewish expectation. All right? And that they were living in the age that had been promised by the Hebrew Scriptures. It would therefore seem natural that they, in trying to understand the interactions between the Torah and the Gospels, scholars would have asked the question, what role, if any, Torah was expected to play in the Messianic era? In other words, the question here is about the role of the law in the Messianic era. All right? I've talked to you about Shapiro's book. It's another excellent buy. This indicates abrogation of certain parts of the Torah. Shapiro as a whole, and I didn't cite him directly, but he's definitely part of the dissertation I'm writing, argues the idea of an abrogation of the Torah in the Messianic era is not a major issue. The issue that existed, and this comes up with Eliezer Urbach, is whether the Messianic era had occurred. But there were rabbis that disagreed with Maimonides about the Torah remaining unchanged and there being no new Torah. And so you see in the rabbinical writings many who believe that the Torah would change and there'd actually be a new Torah during the Messianic era. Okay? And so Maimonides understood Christians as saying there had been an abrogation of the Torah. Now that's what Singer can't stand. Understand that. That's his intolerance point. All right? They regarded the Messianic age as having begun. In addition, Judaism allowed for a new Torah or an abrogation of Torah during the Messianic age, but did not regard Jesus' coming as beginning that Messianic age. So Singer's problem with Christianity is he does not want to acknowledge the possibility that the Torah could change, but the Torah could change during the Messianic age. He's just starting with the assumption that the Messianic age hasn't occurred, and therefore Christianity is leading people away by teaching them not to keep Torah. But his own writings allow for a change in the Torah if the Messianic age had started. And we see that believers, particularly Jewish believers, did believe it started. So essentially, he believes that you are greatly deceived. Christianity is a false religion, and that Jews that leave Judaism to follow Jesus, which he regards as Christianity, are apostate. His argument is that those who say Torah has been superseded and changed are heretics. I shouldn't say apostate. Heretic might be allowable, but he does so based on Maimonides saying that anyone who says this is indeed a heretic. So the early Christians were regarded as heretics by the Messianic community, not so much because Torah couldn't change, but because they didn't want to believe the era in which Torah could change had occurred, and the lines get hardened over time. All right? Let's look at our conclusions and where we go from all this. Where does this take us? And then we'll go back to the questions, and I'll actually go ahead and put the chat up so you can see. He doesn't understand the Gospels, okay? He doesn't understand the Gospels at all. The Gospels are a written record of Jesus' life and writings. You can't argue that the Gospels are false unless you could prove that Jesus' life and writings did not occur that way. So he's stuck either saying the Gospels are inaccurate and twisting Scripture, or Jesus twisted Scripture, and depending on which video he's doing will depend on which way he goes. But the Gospels are the written record of Jesus' saying and life. That's what the Gospels are. So he doesn't get it. Jesus didn't have to write these things down. The Gospels are the written record. He seems to read things into Deuteronomy 13. It has nothing to do with whether there'll be a new Torah when Messiah comes. It has nothing to do with whether the Torah will change when Messiah comes. This passage is about the children of Israel remaining faithful to God and following the commands he had given them at that time to be the basis of the covenant God had with Israel at that time. Well, I shouldn't say at that time. I'm over exaggerating that a little. Okay. This is the covenant that God made with Israel, and the idea is you don't leave the covenant. But that doesn't mean the covenant can't change later on. It's not saying anything about a future change. In fact, the covenant does change later on because the Torah says only the Levites shall indeed bear the Ark of the Covenant. And David says when the Ark is put in the temple, no more shall the Levites carry around the Ark of the Covenant, which is a direct change from Torah. So the Torah does change. And so the idea that the Torah doesn't change is a ridiculous idea. It does change. The rabbis even change Torah. The Torah says atonement requires blood. Singer says it doesn't and tries to make it a food law, like a flavor of food you should eat. And that's not at all what it says. So Singer changes Torah. The idea that Torah can't change at all is not a part of Deuteronomy 13. It's follow the covenant I've made with you. But that doesn't mean God can't change that covenant later. And don't worship any false gods. Okay, we have some questions, so let me switch over to the feed so you can see the question and you can see the answer. Okay? And that's why I did this. This is really pretty cool if it works. There we go. And we can see John's question. John says he has a question. And if he puts that up there, he also shared Zechariah 11. But if John wants to put the question up right now, people will actually be able to see the question and they'll be able to hear the answer. So, John, if you wouldn't mind going ahead, putting that question up there, and then I'll try and deal with it, and we can have some conversation tonight. Because the chat is visible to whoever watches. But I need John to put the question up. So, it looks like he's still there. And the hand's raised. And go for it, John. Probably take a minute or two to show. And you will see that Tippy Bear points out the new covenant. There we go. It's showing in my feed. Wow, it's showing in my feed on my thing quicker than it's showing me. So that's pretty cool. Laban is the father of all prophets, absolutely or generally. Okay, I'm at a loss, John, to understand the question. So maybe that's why I'm having a hard time answering it. If I'm thinking about the same Laban you are, I'm thinking about Jacob's father-in-law. And I don't know that he'd be considered the father of all prophets because Genesis records Abraham being called a prophet by Abimelech. Let me turn to that and try to figure out. But if I'm understanding the biblical timeline right, okay, Abraham and Laban were related, but Laban isn't Abraham. So I don't know if you're asking me about Abraham. Okay, is Balaam a prophet? Yes, in the sense that he is a false prophet, and the Torah doesn't have the term false prophet. So he's a bad prophet. Just because false doesn't exist there. They're just called prophets. He is a prophet for hire who has no integrity, and God has to wipe him out. So we'd say nowadays, we'd say he's a false prophet, but you won't see that language in the Torah because one thing that Rabbi Singer is right about is the term false prophet doesn't appear. And so we would say false prophet because we would add the word false. Torah just neglects to do that because there isn't a term for a false prophet. There's a term for a seer who is not doing it right. So that's really great. Okay. And I'm looking at it here. Obadiah prophesies to Edom, but the genealogy for Obadiah, I believe, is given. It's usually typical in the case of a prophet to go ahead and actually give it. Obadiah is one of your smaller prophets, so he's a little harder to find. Zechariah is the last, and I have to go through here. And I really don't have a tab for Obadiah. So that's kind of shame on me for not having a tab. But I believe Obadiah, most of the other prophets, here's Obadiah, usually give a genealogy. Obadiah does not. And that could be why that's said. Um, um, I don't believe Obadiah is a Edomite. I believe he's prophesying to Edomites. He's in the section of the Torah known as the prophets. The prophets generally had to be Jewish and they had to prophesy in the land, at least part of the time. The only question you might have is Ezekiel. So, why do people quote Numbers 24 as if Yahweh said it? Numbers 24, and we're talking about the oracles of Balaam. They do that because Balaam is told that if you go with these guys, you will speak only the words that I give you. Okay? And so Balaam is told that when you go with these guys, I didn't kill you. I was going to kill you. I'm going to let you go with them, but you're only going to say what I want you to say. So even though Balaam is a no good Nick, he's under strict orders to say only what uh, uh, God says to him. And actually, the princes don't like it very much because he's getting paid to curse Israel and he keeps blessing them. And believe me, if Balaam could have gotten the money for cursing them, he would have done so. So he is speaking the word of God at that point because he is under compulsion to speak the word of God. Okay. Zephaniah is the son of Cushi. Could he be African? Wow. I understand what you're asking because Cush is usually associated with Africa. Um, could he be? Those are always hard questions. At the time that Zephaniah is preaching, I don't know of a large enclave of Jews hanging out in Cush. I can't say that it isn't possible. I could say I regard it as unlikely. Rabbis say he was Edomite, expatriate, but that wouldn't make him Cushite. That would make him Edomite. And Edom was the descendants of Esau. Abraham came from Ur the Chaldees. This is something my black Hebrew Israelite individuals got to get through their head. The migration was east to west, not west to east. And so, no, you can't argue that there was a huge African contingent sitting around in Ur of the Chaldees. Ur of the Chaldees is actually Asiatic. In fact, Hebrew is considered an Afro-Asiatic language, not an African language, because it takes elements from where Abraham came from and then was influenced by an African. There's some African elements through exposure to the language of the Canaanites. And so it's considered Afro-Asiatic. African languages that are really removed from that part of the world are just African languages, not Afro-Asiatic. I seriously doubt. The rabbis say a lot of things. They're probably referring to characteristics. By the way, you're going to see that with the rabbis. Okay, um, somebody could be regarded a certain way, like the Dead Sea communities, which talk about the one of darkness. They always paint Rome as the country of the Antichrist because Rome was Israel's enemy at the time. And so you're going to see this with the rabbis where they say, in a typical fashion as a type, So they might be saying that he's a type of Idumean. You know, he has the same characteristics thereof. Kind of like saying someone's a barbarian. Okay, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they were from the area that Rome regarded as barbarians. It simply means that they exhibit the same characteristics thereof. These are great questions. So that's kind of the way I would handle that. Is that the rabbis are saying, but I don't know they're saying it because they have geographic evidence, or they're saying it in a typical sort of fashion that he is like. Kind of like saying you are sons of your father Satan. Well, it doesn't mean that Satan created man or any group of men. What it means is you're exhibiting the characteristics thereof. And that's very Middle Eastern. We see things like the mother of all wars. But it doesn't mean there's a woman that gave birth to war. Okay, so that sort of language is used. And that may be what's being referred to. I love that this chat's working, though. Well, I hope people appreciate the chat, too, and the good questions. Some folks didn't jump in. That's okay. I appreciate the comments of Radical Love. I'm going to move this up and down. It's not going to work to move it up and down on the screen, okay? But there's a lot of great comments going on here that aren't necessarily questions. They're just comments that are really worthwhile and really encouraging. And I don't want to take anything away from those. Tippy Bear, who's showing on the feed now, mentioned the new covenant. You can't have a new covenant if Torah can never change. Okay, because if the new covenant, with the new covenant, some things are going to alter. By the way, we know some things have altered, don't we? There's no Levitical priesthood. I mean, Hebrews goes to great lengths to discuss how Messiah will be a priest according to the order of Melchizedek because he's from the tribe of Judah, in which nothing is said of a priesthood. Well, that represents a change. So she's very good at pointing that out. Everybody is, wonderful. Some of the comments are just really neat punctuation comments. Okay? They punctuate what's being said and they add to it, but they aren't necessarily questions or anything of that nature. They're just really worthwhile. I'm just going to check because I see another comment from Radical Love, and I want to make sure that I see it on my screen. Abel as well is considered a prophet. Yes, he is considered a prophet. I was caught on that the other day because they don't fall under the Nevi. The Nevi are the prophets. The Hebrew Bible is broken into the Torah, the Nevi'im, that's the word for prophets, and the Ketuvim, that's the writings. And so the other day I was asked if someone was considered a prophet, and I said, well, I'm not so sure. Could be, but I'm not so sure. And it's because they were not included in the Nevi'im. And so I had problems. You chimed in, Radical Love. We're all the true prophets of God, Jews. Well, all the individuals in the Nevi section of the Hebrew Scriptures are Jews. That I can say. Hebrews, if you look at Hebrews, again, Abraham is called a prophet. By the way, Abraham's not a Jew. Abraham is the father of the Jewish people, but he's not himself a Jew. To be a Jew, you have to be descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham was not descended from Jacob because the line went from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob. So Abraham is not a Jew and he's considered a prophet. Why is Daniel in the Ketuvim? Thank you, John Williams, for that question. It is a wonderful question. The reason usually given for Daniel not being in the Ketuvim is he prophesied outside the land, and his primary job description was not prophet. So he was kind of like, doing it on the side. I got my day job as a government official, and then, I got my ministry on the side sort of thing. And so the rabbis don't consider a Ketuvim because he didn't prophesy in the land, and he is not in that role. In other words, you don't see a call like you do with the other prophets. This is the burden of so and so, and God called Jonah. But he is given insight and he does prophesy. See, that's why it's confusing for me sometimes, because there are those that are prophets and then there are those that are officially a part of that section of the scripture. So sorry for the, kind of fudged on that a little bit because my Jewish mind went to the Nevi'im and it should have just went to how the scriptures describe them. So Abraham wasn't a Jew. No, he was not a Jew. He was the father of the Jewish people. But no, Abraham technically was not a Jew. He was called out of Ur of the Chaldees and told to leave his land and his relatives. But to be a Jew, the children of Israel are the Jewish people. And so when you say the children of Israel, well, who was Israel? Israel was Jacob. His children are the Jewish people. Abraham is the father of the Jewish people, like George Washington is considered the father of this country sometimes. He is the great forebearer. He is the great model. He is the patriarch of the Jewish people, but he himself was not Jewish. He was called as a non-Jew. So there's a little wrinkle, right? In all of this stuff with Singer, keep one thing in mind. Abraham was never made righteous by Torah. He was made righteous by his faith. And see, that's what Singer doesn't get. Singer, as nice as I can be about it, doesn't love God, even though he's trying to, because he's too busy loving the law. And that's what Paul says. Having not the righteousness of God, my people and me before I was saved sought a righteousness of ourselves. And Singer is caught in that trap. He's trying to derive his righteousness from God, it just kind of looking past his sin and him keeping the law. Jethro was a son of Abraham through Midian. Jethro was a descendant of Abraham through Midian. So in that sense, son. I think John is using the term son in the sense of descendant of. Yes, but he was not a Jew. Because if you look at Midian, Midian is a son of Abraham's second wife. Yes, Abraham did remarry. He remarried a woman named Keturah. What about the Magi that were looking for the newborn? Would they be considered prophets? Ooh. Well, if you were Babylonian, they would. It's almost like, who do you ask? Are they considered prophets by the Jews? No, they're considered those who responded to the prophecy of Daniel. Daniel actually gave light to the nations the way Israel was supposed to. Now, he did it through Israel's misbehavior. God would have preferred to have done it through Israel's proper behavior. And so, but Daniel leaves prophecy back. The Magi were into all that stuff. They read Daniel's stuff. They probably read about a star coming out of Jacob. And so they are not considered prophets by the Jewish people. But the Babylonians probably thought they were. By Babylonian definition, they may well have been considered a prophetic quest. So, and Radical Love loved your question, and I thought it was a great question too, by the way. I would say no according to the definition of the Nevi'im. I would not place them that way, but I would say that if you were Babylonian, you probably thought they were. They, were probably more like wise men. Well, this is really pretty cool. I am glad this worked out. I hope those who tune in were glad it worked out. We may have lost Jordan. Jordan will be my son-in-law by God's grace in about 3 months. So I'm so thrilled. I'd love to get his feedback sometime as to what we're doing. It would be fun to have him on when we do Matthew, because he's an associate pastor in training, associate pastor. He's been called to the ministry at Peru, which is one of our supporting churches, and they're dear folks there. So it'd be fun. All right, we are doing good. Well, folks, are there any other questions on the board? Wow, radical love. Your mind is just cranking away. For those who are watching, you can check out Radical Love's statement. Might be a little hard to see. I'm going to try to expand it out. Radical Love asked if it's best to have two categories of prophets, like pre-Jewish ones and post-Jewish ones. That is a fascinating idea. I'm going to put that in my theological pipe, uh, and turn it around a little bit. Actually, just kind of could put it there and think about that. That's a good pondering. Um, and I want to think about whether that might be an interesting way. Okay. Yeah, people have time to type. Um, I may try to reduce the zoom on this just a little bit because I think I'm zoomed up just a little bit too much. And, okay, there we go. That's a little better so that people can honestly see your comments just a little bit better if they're on the other station. Um, so I'm gonna put that in my thinking cap there, um, and see how that goes. Alrighty. If Tippy Bear is still typing, I want to give her time, and I want to give time for the thing to catch it. Um, if she's not, just give me a thumbs up or something. I can't always tell what's going on in real time because of the delay. So if anyone's typing something, there are icons there. You can just click that, give me a thumb or a hands up, and I will wait. Oh, there we go. A Jewish rabbi said he believes that Jesus taught the disciples to keep the law kosher, and Christians should too. How would I answer that? Wow, that's the whole first fruits movement. First of all, you need to understand something. Prior to the crucifixion, the new covenant had not been inaugurated. So I'd say to that rabbi, first of all, at what time period you're talking about? You're talking pre crucifixion and resurrection. Because post, we're told to make disciples and teach them everything that Jesus taught them. And lo, he will be with us to the end of the age. Check out Matthew 28, roughly 19 and 20. So I'd say, first of all, you got to define your time. Because Jesus came and he gave full meaning to the Torah, fulfilling it where I could never fulfill it, and revealing the heart of Torah. And so prior to his crucifixion, the new covenant is not inaugurated. The crucifixion and resurrection are important. Check out Hebrews. Everything had to be sprinkled with blood. So Jesus had to die. I would say that no. Acts 15 is very clear that Gentile Christians were never put under the law. This is the actual core of my dissertation. Okay. Uh, I would just say that, it was very clear. And the other thing, too, is which parts of the law do you want them to keep, Rabbi? I mean, if you just reduce it to the kosher laws and the Sabbath and the feasts, the law is a lot more than that. What are you going to do with a rebellious child that a Christian has? They have to take them out and stone them? I mean, there are 613 commandments. And even Moses Maimonides has a whole class of commandments that cannot be done today. So, Rabbi, which part of the law do you have in mind? And if that's true, then why can't I reduce the law to the two great commandments? And if I keep those and seek forgiveness from Jesus when I don't, isn't that enough? So, thank you for pointing out, Tippy Bear, that this rabbi was sincere and it wasn't an attack on Paul. That's good to know. I would say that Paulinian teaching would not support that. So that's kind of the way I would look at that. We will see Rabbi Singer's attack on Paul sometime in the future. It takes me a while to digest Singer, especially when he goes 30 to 45 minutes, because he just doesn't go in a straight line. He likes to do circles. He likes to draw circles. He's Tovia the circle drawer. Okay, he likes to run around in circles. So, all right. Well, this is like old times in Vermont. But the logic they include. Okay, don't know if that's a question, but it is a comment. And you can see that. The word that might look a little cut off is the word false. Okay. It's odd that they include Balaam. It's a problem with the fact that there isn't terminology for a false prophet. So Daniel was true, Balaam was false, but you're stuck with the term Nevi. And Daniel just, I'm not saying Daniel didn't prophesy, he just didn't get in that part of the book. If you watch Winnie the Pooh, you know, Gopher says, I'm not in the book, sort of thing. Daniel's in the Ketuvim. Jesus considered Daniel a prophet because Daniel went outside the definition of just sticking to the Nevi'im as, you know, and saw the fact that Daniel prophesied. And when he uses that with a Jewish audience, they accept it. So he's technically not a prophet, but he's viewed kind of as a prophet. Okay, on one hand, you've got he acted as a prophet. On the other hand, he's not in the Nevi'im. So, welcome to Jewish Thinking 101. You know, there's the official and the unofficial. All right. If you didn't hit the like button, please do. I hope everyone else likes the fact that I could take questions when they view this later and that they could see the questions. And so this was good all the way around. Righteousness is always by faith. Because if you do not believe the right things, you ultimately will not do the right things for the right reason. And Rabbi Singer needs to understand that. Faith does issue in good works, keeping with the two great commandments, but it's not exactly the same. Toda Rabbah from Steve. And I will simply, you know, just acknowledge that wonderful typing in Hebrew. Tomorrow will include a Nash of Hebrew. So if you tune in, you get the Nash of Hebrew. Thank you, Tippy Bear, for being here. I hadn't seen you for a while. John, you are always welcome. It is good to have you in the house. Radical Love, thank you for the incredible questions and encouragement. I did not see Nate, but he may be here. Sometimes he like hides out there in the shadows. But he is wonderful, and I always appreciate him having him here. Gerard, it is always good to have you with us. Now, those are the regulars, but if you're new, chime in. We love having you. We want new people. And hey, you do not have to believe the same things we do. We welcome people into the community who have different points of view, and I will talk to them and address them and share how God has caused me to come to my conclusions. You always get to find out how I ended up getting to where I'm at, and you can take the ride or you cannot take the ride. So there you go. Well, it is a little over. The voice is starting to get dried out here in Arizona. The temperatures are around 107, not in the house, praise God, or my computer would be fried. But the air is getting very dry, so I'm going to call it an evening. I am thrilled with the question and answer time, more interaction. So that is a wonderful thing. I'm going to go ahead and say Erev Tov, even though it is really not sort of evening, but I'm going to try it here. I'm going to pump in an Erev Tov. I'm going to try. My keyboard came up. And there it is. Erev Tov without the vowel markings. There we go. I may have misspelled it. A little hard to work with that keyboard, but that looks like an ion. And so good evening, everybody. It's been great to have you with. And I hope that this continues to grow and work well. We are almost at that 300. I pray God pushes us over the level. Then we just go for the next post and we just keep jumping over those hurdles. So, oh, I forgot to turn my keyboard to English. That was the funniest looking English you've ever seen.